She was asked to leave the restaurant without being seated, without a word of welcome. Other guests walked in freely, smiling, escorted to their tables. She didn't argue, she simply turned and walked out. Because the woman they dismissed as out of place was actually the owner of the entire building. So who really didn't belong there? Before we dive into the full story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful, true-to-life stories that need to be heard. Thank you. It was a mild Sunday afternoon when Celeste Warren stepped out of her car in front of Lindell's, a high-end restaurant tucked between luxury boutiques and office towers. She wore a plain beige coat, the same one she'd had for years, and carried an old leather purse with a zipper that stuck sometimes. Her best friend Gloria walked beside her, chatting softly about the week ahead, unaware of the tension that was about to shift the air. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with quiet conversations, the kind where voices never rise, but judgments linger in glances. Celeste smiled at no one in particular, just taking it all in, the lights, the clink of silverware, the scent of roasted lamb wafting from the kitchen. She didn't come to make trouble. She didn't expect a welcome parade. She just wanted to have lunch. But someone behind a host stand with too much certainty and too little curiosity, decided she didn't belong. And that, without knowing it, changed everything. Because what no one realized was that Celeste wasn't just another guest. She was the one holding the lease. It was just after 2 on a Sunday afternoon when Celeste Warren and her old friend Gloria stepped into Lindell's, one of those downtown restaurants that always looked like it belonged to someone else's world. The kind with thick linen tablecloths, servers in pressed shirts, and quiet piano music floating in the air like it didn't know how to stop. Celeste wore her usual beige coat, the one with the lining starting to fray at the sleeves. Her shoes were comfortable, not polished, and her purse, a soft, worn leather thing, hung neatly from her shoulder. She didn't dress for spectacle. She dressed for dignity. The hostess barely looked up when they walked in. Just a flick of the eyes, a pause, and a slow lean toward the reservation book, which might as well have been a script. "Do you have a reservation?" the young woman asked. Polite but indifferent, Gloria smiled brightly, used to smoothing over these sorts of moments. "We were hoping for a table by the window. It's just the two of us." The hostess didn't move. Her fingers tapped the book like they were stalling for time. "We're booked for the afternoon," she said, her tone soft but final. Celeste looked around. There were at least 5 empty tables in plain sight. She didn't say anything, just looked. It wasn't the first time she'd been told there was no room when she could clearly see that there was. From the back of the room, a tall man emerged, Howard Lindell. His silver hair was combed back too neatly, and his blazer looked like it had just come back from the cleaners. He walked with the confidence of someone who hadn't been told no in decades. "There's a policy," he said gently, with a tight-lipped smile. "We don't seat walk-ins during peak hours." His eyes never met Celeste's. They hovered somewhere over her shoulder, like she wasn't fully there. Gloria took a step forward. "We're not here to make trouble." But clearly, Celeste put a hand on her friend's arm. Not hard, but firm. "It's fine," she said softly. Howard nodded, as if the matter had been neatly resolved. "Enjoy your afternoon, ladies." As they turned to leave, Celeste's eyes landed on a table by the window. One chair pulled out just slightly, and in the center of the table, a single bouquet of white lilies sat in a glass vase. No one around it, no meal, just the flowers and the space they held. "Who leaves flowers like that?" Gloria asked under her breath. Celeste didn't answer. She simply looked a moment longer, her face unreadable. Then she turned back toward the door. Howard called out, his voice too smooth, too final. "Some people just don't belong in certain places. It's best to know your lane." Outside, the street was quieter than it should have been. Celeste adjusted her coat. Gloria was fuming beside her, still looking back at the glass door. But Celeste just walked forward, her shoes clicking steadily on the sidewalk. She didn't speak, not yet, but the set of her shoulders said what words couldn't. They had just been denied a chair, but not the kind Howard thought he controlled. Gloria hadn't stopped talking since they left the restaurant. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of someone who couldn't accept what had just happened. "You should have said something," Celeste. That man. He humiliated you. And for what? Wearing the wrong coat? Having the wrong skin color? You should have told him who you are. People like that need to be taught. Celeste kept both hands on the wheel, her eyes steady on the road as the early afternoon light filtered through the windshield. She didn't answer right away. The city moved slowly outside, people out shopping, waiting at crosswalks, sipping drinks under awnings. Life, as always, kept going, no matter who got turned away at the door. The SUV creaked softly with every bump. It wasn't new, it wasn't sleek, but it had taken her through years of late nights and early mornings. School runs and real estate visits. It was hers, like the coat she wore. It didn't need to prove anything. They pulled up outside a modest cafe nestled under a row of brownstones. Gloria started to say something else, but Celeste raised a hand gently, a quiet signal that she'd heard enough. Inside, the cafe smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon. A college student tapped away at a laptop in the corner. The cashier greeted Celeste with a nod, recognition. But not fanfare. They sat by the window. The same one Celeste always preferred. The light was soft there, and she could see the building across the street, Hartsfield Plaza. 18 stories of glass and concrete. One of the few things she'd built that stood in plain sight. As they waited for their drinks, Celeste pulled out her laptop from her bag, scuffed leather, zipper a little stiff. With a few keystrokes, she opened her inbox and clicked on an email near the top. The subject line read, "Lease agreement renewal, Lindell's Restaurant." Gloria blinked. "Wait, that's... The building is managed under my holding company," Celeste said calmly. "I'm the majority owner." Gloria stared at her, the heat in her face fading into confusion. "You mean, you own Lindell's?" Celeste's eyes didn't leave the screen. "Not the restaurant. The land under it." There was a pause. The coffee arrived, and the clinking of the cups seemed louder than usual. "Why didn't you say anything back there?" Gloria asked finally. Her voice was softer now. "Unsure." Celeste looked out the window. "Because if I had," she said slowly, "he would have changed how he treated me. Not because he respects people, but because he fears power. And that's not the kind of truth I wanted to see." The sun shifted slightly, casting long lines through the glass. Across the street, a delivery truck idled at the curb. A man stepped out with a stack of boxes and disappeared through the service entrance. "I needed to know," Celeste said after a moment, "what kind of man he really was. When I was nobody." Her mind drifted as she spoke, not just to Howard Lindell, but to every time she'd been overlooked. The school board meeting where they called her articulate with surprise. The bank manager who asked if she understood the paperwork for her first property. The funeral home director who spoke to her daughter like Celeste wasn't standing right there. There was a time when she'd taught high school English, when she used to believe that kindness was enough. Then her husband got sick. Bills piled up. Nights were spent grading papers and researching loans. She started investing in small properties with every spare dollar. Quietly, carefully, and she never stopped. Celeste reached into her bag and pulled out a printed copy of the lease renewal document. She slid it across the table toward Gloria, who looked down at the thick text. The legal language, the clear new terms outlined in firm print. "I'm not going to raise my voice," Celeste said, finishing her coffee in one long sip. "I'm going to raise the rent." She smiled, not cruelly, but with a tired grace. The kind of smile you learn to wear when you've waited too long for justice to speak on its own. Gloria folded the paper and slid it back. "You always were better at the long game." Celeste stood up, smoothing the sleeve of her coat where the thread had started to fray. She looked at the building one more time through the window. "Let's just say," she murmured, "I don't need applause. Just timing." Outside, the wind had picked up, tugging softly at the hem of her coat as she stepped into the light. Her steps unhurried. 3 days passed with hardly a word between Celeste and Gloria. Not out of tension, but because nothing more needed to be said. Gloria knew her friend well enough to recognize that when Celeste grew quiet, it wasn't silence, it was strategy. On the morning of the third day, Celeste walked into the building she owned with the same calm stride she always had. She nodded at the security guard, exchanged pleasantries with the receptionist, and took the elevator to the 18th floor without making a sound beyond the click of her heels against polished tile. Ken Abrams was already waiting inside her office. A thick folder laid out neatly on the table between them. The window behind him looked out over downtown. But neither of them was paying attention to the view. Ken didn't waste time. He opened the folder and slid the lease renewal across to her. 35% increase, he said, tapping the number. That's within your rights under the agreement. But it's not going to sit well with Mr. Lindell. Celeste picked up a pen. Her eyes skimmed the document. But she didn't read it line by line. She knew every clause, every footnote. She was the one who insisted on those terms 5 years ago. Long before she knew who would end up sitting in that restaurant's back office. Ken leaned forward, sensing her stillness. Are you sure about this? He's not the kind of man to go quietly. He'll push back. Celeste's gaze drifted to the edge of the paper. She didn't answer right away. Then she signed. It's not about pushing back, she said. It's about pushing forward. Ken gave a slow nod, collecting the signed pages and slipping them into his briefcase. Then I'll deliver it today. Across town, in the kitchen of Lindell's, Howard was chewing through his second espresso of the morning when his assistant brought in a sealed envelope. The assistant didn't say a word, just placed it gently on the table. Howard opened it without care, expecting routine paperwork, but the moment his eyes found the new figures, his jaw tightened. He read the section again, and again. He muttered something under his breath, then stood up so fast his chair scraped the tile. Get me building management, he snapped. Now, within the hour, he was on the phone with Ken Abrams, who kept his tone polite but clipped. This adjustment falls entirely within the lease terms, Ken explained. The market has shifted. The property value has gone up. The owner believes this reflects a fair adjustment. Howard tried to interrupt, but Ken didn't flinch. And who the hell is this owner? Howard demanded. They ever even set foot in this place? There was a pause. Ken answered evenly. The leaseholder has chosen not to engage directly. But I assure you, the decision is final. Howard slammed the phone down. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sharp sting of losing control. He had always believed in reading people, figuring out who was worth respecting and who could be dismissed. Whoever this landlord was, they were stepping on his toes. And he didn't like it. Back in her modest kitchen, Celeste poured herself a cup of tea. No sugar, no lemon, just plain black, the way she'd always liked it. She sat by the window, watching the condensation slowly form on the outside of the glass. Her thoughts weren't racing. They were calm, methodical, almost quiet in their pace. She wasn't angry. Not really. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about structure. About reminding someone like Howard that the foundation under his feet belonged to someone he hadn't even looked in the eye. The tea steamed softly in the light. Celeste wrapped her fingers around the cup and let the warmth sink in. She didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She just waited, for nothing in particular. Just for time to do its work. The moment the revised lease arrived, Howard Lindell reacted the only way he knew how, by fighting. Not with fists, but with faxes, calls, and cleverly worded threats. He brought in a lawyer from his golf circle, the kind who boasted about overturning zoning ordinances and intimidating small business inspectors. Within 48 hours, a formal complaint had been filed accusing the property owner of unfair business practices and unjustified rent inflation. Howard didn't stop there. He sent a petition to the local Chamber of Commerce, then another to the city's Commercial Oversight Board. He called in a favor with a columnist at the local paper, hoping for a sympathetic piece about how rising real estate greed was killing small businesses. But that article never got published. The truth was simple, even if Howard couldn't admit it. The lease agreement he'd signed 5 years earlier was airtight. The clause allowing a rent adjustment after 5 years was printed right there, in the same ink as his signature. He had known about it. He just hadn't believed anyone would dare use it against him. The restaurant began to feel it first, not from outside pressure, but from within. Orders slowed, walk-ins thinned, and the kitchen, once known for its precision and pride, grew tense. Dishes went out late, plates came back half-eaten. Howard's temper, never known for its patience, flared more often than the burners on the line. Jasmine Rivera had worked in that kitchen longer than most of the wine bottles had been stocked. She was quiet but efficient, known for her calm during the Friday night rush. But after an evening where Howard berated her in front of the staff for serving the wrong kind of guest, again, something in her shifted. She clocked out, walked home, and posted a single line on her social media that read, "Sometimes the person you push out might own the floor you stand on." She didn't name names. She didn't need to. Within hours, it was being shared and reshared. People speculated. Some dismissed it as vague drama. Others read between the lines. But no one could say for sure what Jasmine meant. Except for Celeste. She saw the post late that night while sipping tea in bed. The screen glowing against her glasses. She didn't react. No like. No comment. Just a long exhale as she set the phone down beside her and turned off the lamp. The next morning, Ken called. "Howard's people want to meet," he said. "They're asking for a sit-down to renegotiate terms." I told them I'd relay the message. Celeste stirred her tea, letting the spoon clang gently against the porcelain. "And? I can set it up if you want." She thought for a moment, eyes on the slow swirl in her cup. "Tell them there's nothing to renegotiate. Not even a conversation? No, I'm not interested in performing for him." Later that day, Gloria stopped by with a container of soup and a worried look. "He's cornered now," she said. "They'll try everything. You sure you don't want to speak to him directly?" Celeste sat at the kitchen table, thumbing through her mail. "If I speak, I give him control over the narrative. I don't need him to hear me. I need him to feel the silence." Gloria frowned. "So you're just going to wait?" Celeste looked up, her expression soft but immovable. "No, I'm going to let the truth do what it does best, surface." And surface it did. 3 days later, a short video clip leaked online. Grainy, from an overhead camera at the host stand inside Lindell's. In it, Howard stood with arms crossed, chin high, as he told two women they weren't a good fit for the establishment. There was no shouting, no slurs, just the unmistakable tone of someone who believed he had the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. The video didn't come from Celeste. It wasn't shared by Gloria or anyone in her circle. It was uploaded anonymously to a small local forum, then picked up by someone on social media. And within 24 hours, it had been reposted thousands of times. Howard had spent days filing complaints, rallying lawyers, and demanding meetings. But now, he was about to face something he couldn't file away, a mirror. Howard hadn't slept much in days. The video had spread like spilled ink, quiet at first, then everywhere all at once. It was never posted by a big outlet. No one credited it to any major news source. Just a 15-second clip, grainy and still, showing a man in a blazer dismissing two black women at the front of his restaurant. He never raised his voice. He never said anything explicitly cruel. That was the problem. People didn't need shouting to recognize condescension. They could see it in the subtle lean of his shoulders, the smirk that barely formed, the way he turned away before they had even finished speaking. The internet had a name for it, polite prejudice. And now, it had a face to go with it. He tried everything, hired a digital consultant to scrub the video, filed a takedown complaint, issued a brief, tepid statement about misunderstandings and context. None of it mattered. The clip was reposted, remixed, translated into different languages, and tagged under a new viral phrase, #SheOwnsTheBuilding. Howard stood behind the host stand one morning, watching a group of customers leave just after looking at the menu. He heard the whispers, felt the side glances, and when his assistant muttered something about a half-dozen cancellations that week, he didn't respond. He just walked to the back, closed the office door, and sat in the dark. Across town, in a cafe that smelled faintly of cardamom and lemon peel, Jasmine Rivera sat at a small table tucked near the window. She had been asked to meet a man named Ken Abrams. But it wasn't him who arrived. It was Celeste Warren. Jasmine stood without thinking, caught somewhere between surprise and apology. "I thought this was a legal meeting." Celeste smiled gently. "Ken works for me. I wanted to come myself." Jasmine hesitated, unsure of what to say. Her apron, worn and folded in her lap, still had traces of flour from the bread she'd baked that morning. She wasn't used to being noticed, especially not by people who dressed like Celeste, with quiet elegance and no need to prove anything. "I didn't think you'd know who I was," Jasmine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't forget people who did the right thing when it costs them something." Celeste replied. And I noticed you even before the video. They sat. The hum of conversations around them blurred into the background. Celeste reached into her bag and slid a manila envelope across the table. If things go the way I expect, the restaurant space will become available soon. I'd like you to consider taking it over. Jasmine blinked, caught completely off guard. Me? Celeste nodded. Not because you're loud or famous, but because you didn't flinch when it counted. And I think you know how to build something people feel safe in. Jasmine looked down at the envelope. But I'm not. I mean, I've never run my own place. Celeste leaned forward, her voice softer now. That's all right. Most of us started by doing things we weren't sure we could. They sat in silence for a few breaths. The envelope sat unopened, like a door not yet pushed. Jasmine finally picked it up, her fingers running along the seam. What if I fail? Celeste's eyes didn't move from hers. Then you'll fail with integrity. And that's more than he ever had. Outside the window, the sun was catching on the glass of Hartsfield Plaza, throwing fractured light onto the sidewalk. Jasmine followed Celeste's gaze for a moment, then turned back to the papers in her hand. She didn't say yes, not yet, but she didn't walk away either. The silence inside Howard's office was heavy, broken only by the slow tick of a decorative clock mounted above the wine rack. He hadn't bothered turning the lights on that morning. What was the point? He already knew the numbers, knew the payroll he couldn't meet, the suppliers he owed, and the reservations that kept canceling with short, cold messages. Plans changed. The restaurant that once took pride in its reservation-only status was now open to walk-ins. And even then, the seats stayed cold. That morning, dressed in a jacket that hung looser than it used to, Howard walked into the property management office at Hartsfield Plaza. He didn't have an appointment, didn't want one. He wanted to see whoever had the gall to twist the knife like this. He expected to face the real owner, the face behind the curtain. But when the receptionist led him to the small, glass-walled meeting room, it was Ken Abrams waiting with a folder, a glass of water, and a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Howard didn't sit. I came to talk to the decision-maker, he said, voice rough, restrained. You are, Ken replied calmly. The owner has given me full authority on her behalf. She hiding behind you now? Ken didn't answer. He simply opened the folder and slid 2 documents across the table. One was the updated lease agreement, same figures, same conditions. The other was a formal notice of termination, pending failure to meet the new terms by the end of the week. You have 2 options, Mr. Lindell, Ken said. You sign the new agreement, or you vacate the premises by Friday. Howard's eyes narrowed, his fingers curled into fists at his sides. This is extortion. It's legal, Ken replied, and it's within the original contract you signed. Howard leaned over the table, his voice low. I'll take this to court. I'll drag this thing out for months. You can, Ken said, unfazed. You have the right to file. And our client has the law. For a moment, the air seemed to leave the room. Howard straightened, jaw tight. He picked up the lease, glanced at it, then tossed it back on the table with a dry laugh. I don't know who your boss is, he said, but she doesn't understand what kind of man she's messing with. Ken finally met his eyes. She understands exactly. Howard turned and left without another word. That same day, several blocks away, Celeste sat at a round table in a modest conference room, sipping water from a glass cup as 3 advisors flipped through strategy documents. They were waiting for her decision. One of them, a younger woman in a blue blazer, looked up and asked carefully, do you want to step forward now? Let the public know you're the owner behind all this? Celeste looked out the window at the skyline. The light was softer in the late afternoon, casting long shadows against the glass. She thought for a moment, then answered quietly, if I need a crowd to prove I have worth, then I've already lost what matters. The others nodded, some with admiration, some with hesitation, but no one questioned her resolve. Outside the old restaurant, Jasmine stood alone in the quiet. The street was nearly empty, the wind cool against her face. In her hands was a folded piece of paper with pencil sketches and coffee stains, her draft of a small dining space she had imagined a dozen times but never dared to chase. She called it, the welcome table. Her thumb brushed over the title as she stared at the darkened windows of Lindell's. There was no sign out front, No customers going in, just locked doors and silence. And in Jasmine's chest, a question pressed harder than ever: if she didn't step into that space, if she didn't turn her vision into something real, then who would? She took a breath, not a deep one, just enough to steady the edges of her doubt. And she walked away, not because she was done thinking, but because her heart had already taken one step ahead. The chairs in the dining room had been rearranged in tight rows. The linen tablecloths swapped for plain folding tables holding microphones and half-empty water bottles. Howard Lindell stood at the far end of the room, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, suit pressed, but his face lined with something exhaustion couldn't quite explain. The local press had shown up, some with real cameras, others with just phones and tripods. It wasn't a media storm, but enough to create the illusion that he still mattered. He opened with a smile that didn't land, talking about recent misunderstandings and how rising rent and private landlords were affecting family businesses. He described himself as the victim of a coordinated campaign, targeted unfairly, for not bending to the politics of the day. A few cameras clicked, most stayed still. He paused, waited for a question. None came. Then, from the back of the room, a voice, low, firm, unmistakably clear. "Did you also tell them," the woman asked, "that you refused to serve me in this very room?" The silence cracked like glass. Every head turned. Even the cameramen raised their lenses a little higher. Celeste Warren stepped forward. No entourage, no podium, just her and that familiar beige coat, worn in the elbows, smoothed at the cuffs. She carried no folder, no press packet, only 2 documents folded neatly in her hand. She walked with the kind of composure that unsettles a room, not because it's loud, but because it leaves no space for anyone else to speak over it. Howard's face stiffened, his jaw clenched so tightly, the corners of his mouth barely moved. "This is a private event," he said. Celeste didn't stop. She reached the front and unfolded the papers without a word. On one, the original lease, signed by Howard Lindell 5 years earlier. On the other, the revised agreement, the one he had refused. She placed them side by side on the table. "I don't need to explain what these mean," she said softly, turning slightly to face the crowd. "But I think the city deserves to know how easy it is to be dismissed when you don't look like someone's idea of a proper guest." There was no outrage in her tone, no trembling, no grand gestures, only truth. From near the doorway, Jasmine stepped forward next. She held a simple folder, no logo, just a name handwritten across the front, the welcome table. "I'll be leasing this space," she said, voice steady. "We're opening something new, something for everyone." Someone clapped, then another. Then the room shifted. The same reporters who had scribbled notes with half-interest now turned toward Celeste. The questions began to come, quick, eager. A young journalist in a denim jacket asked, "Miss Warren, do you have anything you'd like to say directly to Mr. Lindell?" Celeste turned her head slowly. She looked at Howard, not with vengeance, but with something quieter, something heavier. "I think he's already heard what matters," she replied, "and what he does with it is up to him." She didn't stay for the rest of the questions, didn't wait for applause. She stepped down, walked toward the exit, and as she passed the rows of chairs, not one person turned away. Howard remained behind, standing too still, eyes fixed on the documents in front of him. The contract he signed, the one he didn't. They sat together on the table like 2 versions of the same man, one who thought he had power, and one who had just watched it walk out the door. It had rained gently that morning, the kind of soft drizzle that made the sidewalks shine and the trees look richer than usual. The gray sky stretched wide over the city, but it wasn't gloomy. It was the kind of gray that held a certain calm, like the quiet pause before a new season begins. The welcome table had been open for 3 months. There were no grand opening banners, no newspaper ads or flashy social media countdowns. Yet somehow, every seat seemed to know when it would be filled. Families came on Sundays. Office workers dropped by during lunch breaks. Students gathered with notebooks and half-finished ideas. The food was simple, hearty stews, fresh bread, and tea that always came just the right temperature. But people didn't come only for the meals. They came because the place felt like an answer to a question they didn't know how to ask. Near the front window, A small table sat tucked to the side. 2 chairs. One always left empty. No one asked why. They seemed to understand instinctively that it wasn't for a guest running late, or someone expected later in the day. It was for something else entirely. That afternoon, as the rain slowed to a mist, Celeste Warren stepped through the front door. She shook her umbrella gently by the entrance and gave a nod to the young hostess, who smiled with easy recognition and pointed toward the corner. Jasmine met her halfway with a pot of tea. "You're early," Jasmine said, half teasing. Celeste unwrapped her scarf slowly. "Or maybe everyone else is just late." They shared a quiet laugh. Jasmine poured the tea. Her movements were smoother now, her voice more assured than it had been that day in the cafe months ago. Something in her posture had changed, not heavier, just steadier. On the wall nearby hung a small black and white photograph. In it, Celeste and Gloria were laughing, stepping away from the entrance of Lindell's. The camera had caught them just as Celeste had turned to say something, a half-smile playing on her face. It was a photo no one remembered being taken, but Gloria had found it online, tucked in the back of a local blog about community resilience. Jasmine nodded toward the photo. "I think people look at it and wonder what you said." Celeste sipped her tea, the warmth settling in her hands. "Probably something like, 'Let's find a better place.'" Toward the back, a young server, a girl no more than 20, with long braids and a soft accent, came by to refresh the water. She hesitated, then asked gently, "Excuse me, ma'am, are you the founder?" Celeste looked up, her eyes soft. "No," she said, "I just opened the door." The girl tilted her head. "The door to what?" Celeste smiled, but didn't answer. Sometimes, the quiet carried more truth than a full explanation. After a while, she stood. Jasmine looked at her, not asking her to stay longer, just meeting her gaze in a way that said everything important had already been said. Celeste walked slowly to the window. She paused by the table with 2 chairs. The one by the glass had a cushion. Someone always made sure it was dusted, even though no one sat there. She touched the back of the chair, just briefly. Then she stepped outside, pulling her coat closer as the wind lifted the last of the mist from the sidewalk. Behind her, etched in neat cursive on the glass door, the same words remained. "All are welcome, even if the world said otherwise." She didn't raise her voice, but somehow, the room got quiet. One chair by the window stayed empty, not forgotten, just waiting. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do is not to fight louder, but to simply stay standing when others turn away. Not all victories are loud. Some come quietly and stay. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, or even just a pause, subscribe to Undercover Truths for more stories that echo long after they end. Thank you for watching.